and welcome back to another Harry Potter oriented fanfiction. This is a Harry and Hermione story where Hermione is attending the Quidditch World Cup final and ends up having a one Harry Potter landing straight into her lap. This is not my story and belongs to Untold Harmony. I shall share the link to this story in the description below so that you may read it at a later date. So sit back, relax, and grab a nice warm cup of tea as I read to you Fateful. Hermione, Hermione. Above the noise of the crowd walking past, Hermione Granger heard faint shouts of her name. She craned her neck above the moving bodies to locate the source of the sound. There were too many people though, too much confusion, too many conflicting noises that she didn't know where to look. It was a terrible idea to have agreed to meet at the stadium entrance. Whose idea was this again? Hermione, she heard once more, closer this time. Her head swiveled from left to right until she felt a force knock into her side. She was enveloped into a hug from her dear friend, her best friend, Amélie Bernard. The petite female had one of the strongest grips known to men, although she barely reached 5 feet. Her body was shaking with excitement as she hugged Hermione and rocked them side to side. Hermione laughed openly and encircled her arms around the other female. It was Amélie's idea to meet here, and Hermione could hardly say no to the other witch. Hermione, I'm so excited, Amélie screamed again before letting go. I can see that, Hermione replied as she looked at Amélie's outfit. The witch was decked in red, white, and blue. Her normally black hair was tipped with the 2 primary colours. She wore a snow-white beret that rested perfectly atop her head. Her top was blood red, as were the pair of shorts she was wearing. Draped on her shoulders was a large French flag. On Amélie's porcelain cheeks were 2 more flags drawn with makeup. Her lips were painted red as well as her nails. And that drew another laugh from Hermione. It was the fact that the item her friend was carrying, a baguette, a 2 feet long, proudly French, and looked to be quite fresh baguette. You brought a baguette? Hermione asked incredulously. Of course, Amélie replied. It's French. Besides, we could have it as a snack for when we get hungry, she added quite seriously, waving a long loaf of bread around. She studied what Hermione was wearing and gasped, aghast. Where's your team spirit? Hermione looked down at her clothes. She wore a simple pair of blue shorts and a white tank top. White trainers were on her feet. What's wrong with what I'm wearing? Hermione asked with a frown. Amélie rolled her eyes. I knew you would do something like this, which is exactly why I brought extras. Hold this for a second. C'est le voir. The baguette was thrust into Hermione's hands. The dark-haired witch rummaged through her bag strapped to her waist. It too was charmed to look like a French bag. Out came a wand and 2 pieces of shiny laminated paper, which she proceeded to hand to Hermione. Hermione's eyebrows raised, and she discreetly looked around them as more items emerged from the bag than what was physically possible. Emily withdrew another beret, blue this time, something which looked to be rolled up socks, a square of folded material, which Hermione assumed was another French flag, and a golden rooster. "Why do you have a rooster?" Hermione asked, as the offending item was thrust into her hands. She looked at the metal rooster agog. It was smaller than the animal, but it was still quite large and heavy. Moreso, it was so brightly gold and shiny. It was almost as if it were emanating its own rays. "C'est le Corca Louis," Emily repeated. "Come on, Hermione. Are you even French?" Hermione knew that the Gallic rooster was, of course, for it was France's unofficial symbol. "But where in the world did you get this?" "You needn't worry about that," Emily said, and simply grabbed her wand from Hermione. Looking imploringly at the gaping witch, Emily cast a spell that she would often use to dress her clients. Hermione came out of the spell with the beret on her head and the French flag wrapped around her arms. Her curly brown hair was in a French braid, draped elegantly over one shoulder and tied with a ribbon of white silk. The striped red, white, and blue knee-high socks were on her feet, and French flags were drawn on her cheeks. Like Emily, her lips were painted red, as well as her fingernails. Clutched in Hermione's hands was the rooster. "There, you look so much better," Emily said with a beaming smile. Linking arms with Hermione, Emily led them to join the stream of people entering the large open space stadium in front. Hermione simply laughed and shook her head. "I don't know how you got me to come with you today. I don't know a thing about Quidditch." "This is a momentous occasion," Emily exclaimed passionately. She expertly dodged bodies and led Hermione near the front of the queue to enter. France versus England for the Quidditch World Cup final, the biggest rivals in the game, no, in the whole world competing once more for the cup. I will not have you miss this." She had a point, Hermione mused. This was history in the making. Hermione let herself be led inside the roaring stadium. Chapter 2. To avoid any home court advantage, the stadium was located in what many would consider neutral territory. No, not Switzerland, but the large body of water separating England from France and the rest of the continent. The stadium stood smack in the middle of the English Channel. Or rather, it was submerged in the middle of the English Channel. Like a bowl placed in a bathtub half full, the top of the stadium emerged between the roaring waves. The International Confederation of Wizards Committee had magically built a stadium in the water. A wall of marble protected the layers, spectators, and entire Quidditch field from the wrath of the channel, while underground tunnels, especially built for the occasion, led fans from both England and France towards the stadium. Hermione's jaw turned slack as she climbed higher and higher up the stands to their seats. The stadium was huge and roaring, and so alive that she felt it had its own heartbeat. Everywhere she looked, she saw red, white, and blue. Everyone cheered and yelled and enthusiastically waved either St. George's Cross or the tricolour. Hermione saw that Emily wasn't the only one to bring baguettes to the stadium, for hundreds of French fans proudly waved their bread in the air. Emily got to the very top of the stands and led Hermione to two seats overlooking the stadium. The top of the highest Quidditch hoop extended to just below their seats. They were at the highest section and furthest away from the actual Quidditch field, but they were in the middle of the pitch in between the two goals. Below them, on the other side of the stadium, was one of the large screens currently showing replays of the highlights of the World Cup games. Hermione peeked over the metal railing in front of their seats and gaped at the distance to the ground. "We're so high up," she whispered to Emily. "Best seats in the house. We could see everything from up here, and feel everything too," Emily yelled. She got to the edge of the railing and waved her French flag proudly. The French fans sat around them, cheering and hollering. Suddenly the screen turned black. The spotlights came to life, casting the whole stadium in a bright glow. Everyone got on their feet and cheered. Hermione followed their lead and stood next to Emily. One hand was gripped tightly on the metal railing, while Emily held onto the other. The other witch screamed and yelled and vibrated in anticipation next to Hermione. A figure appeared in the darkness of the screen. It was a man dressed in a fine three-piece suit made of dark velvet, which was a stark contrast against his pure white hair. He was handsome, and the whole stadium cheered when he smiled. He brought his wand to his throat, muttered a spell, and Hermione heard his voice boom around the arena. "Welcome," he said, and paused dramatically. The stadium grew quiet. "To the 425th Quidditch World Cup Final." The stadium erupted in deafening acclamation. "My name is Mentor Metaxas, and I am the chairman of the International Confederation of Wizards Quidditch Committee. I am simply honored and proud to welcome you here to see the Battle of the Giants. This fight is going to be unforgettable, since it is the Clash of the Titans. Our entire world history was leading up to this very moment, when these lifelong rivals face each other once again. England." The English fans broke out in yells and fierce shouts. Hermione swore she heard a lion's roar. "And France." Hermione laughed when Emily jumped and screamed next to her to show her support for her beloved country. "Our head referee is Lord Baron Mackenzie," Metaxas announced with a flourish. The stadium cheered, and a short but muscular man with flaming red hair and a large moustache walked to the middle of the field. He was dressed in all black. A vibrating trunk floated behind him and set itself down on the grass when he stopped. Hermione watched on the screen as Mackenzie surveyed the stadium with severe green eyes and pursed lips. A shiny broom remained perched on his shoulder. Assisting him tonight are referees Ian Capulet and Anastasia Springfield. Two more figures walked onto the pitch. One, a tall male with a bald head, and the other a beautiful blonde. Both wore black and had brooms on their shoulders. "And now, here are your starting lineups," Metaxas said. There was anticipation in his voice now. The stadium clapped, and Hermione felt the collective excitement of everyone around her. Her hand finally let go of the railing, and she found herself clapping and cheering with the crowd. "First, let me introduce you to the French national team," Metaxas roared. Emily and Hermione shouted and clapped as all the French fans got to their feet. A large flag of the familiar vertical stripes unfurled on the Quidditch match below. On cue, a hailstorm of blue rocks came falling from the sky. It was magic, as it didn't hurt when the rocks hit the skin. When one fell on Hermione's hand, she saw that it was shining and brilliant blue sapphire. Everyone in the stadium gasped and eagerly held their hands out for the gems. First, hailing from Marseille and representing the fleur-de-lis, we have the league's record holder for the most saves during a career so far at 394, French team captain, number 14, keeper, René Dubois. "She's amazing," Emily yelled over the cheers. Hermione could only nod, awestruck. She saw a figure in royal blue zip into the air from one of the openings at the side of the stadium. Her eyes watched the screen which showed the French keeper circle the field. Her black hair was trimmed above her shoulders like a pixie. Her eyes were as bright blue as her Quidditch robes. She raised one hand and waved to the crowd, a shining smile on her beautiful face. Metaxas, with equal fervour, introduced the beaters and chasers. They were Giles de Charnel, beater number 20, Jean-Paul Vernier, beater number 15, Rose Pomeroy, chaser number 3, Etienne Tremblay, chaser number 24, and Luc Lacroix, chaser number 12. From Paris, he has played in more Quidditch World Cups than anyone else here tonight. Le Comet, the Count, number 1, Seeker, Philippe Baudelaire. Emily shrieked so loud that Hermione laughed and moved her head away. As she clapped, she watched another figure in blue circle the field. The screen showed a very handsome man with auburn hair and cool grey eyes. His smile was charming and showed his full set of teeth as he acknowledged the crowds. He winked at the camera and the stadium grew louder. The French national team hovered on their brooms in front of the golden hoops to Hermione's left. The French battle cry rang throughout the stadium. "Allez les Bleus! Allez les Bleus! Allez les Bleus!" Amélie shouted the chant, and Hermione found herself doing so as well. Together they raised their flags with both hands as they showed support to France. Metaxas grinned as he let the French team and their fans have their moment. He had cleared his throat once again, and the stadium quietened down as much as was possible. Hermione saw the English sitting around her, tense in anticipation. "Everyone, help me welcome the national team of England." Chapter 3. The English flag of pure white, emblazoned with the red cross, unfurled on the field. English fans screamed and shouted as fireworks of gold erupted all around the stadium. Gold sparks fell onto the field, and magic amassed the embers. 3 gigantic golden lions were formed from the embers and hovered in the middle of the pitch. Hermione watched in awe as the lions opened their mouths and roared. The sound reverberated around the arena, sending shivers down her spine. The lions exploded in another flash of gold, and golden nuggets rained down into their stands. From Devon, he allowed not one single goal in the semi-final match against Romania, which brought the English team here to the finals. Here is number 9, keeper, Ronald Weasley. A figure in white with bright red hair zoomed out and into the air to the adulation of the crowd. The cameras followed Ron Weasley as he made his lap around the Quidditch field. Both hands were raised as he waved, his smile so deep and pronounced. He stopped his lap and hovered in front of the other set of Quidditch hoops. "He holds the record for most knockouts in the league, so you better watch out. Number 13, beater, Nicholas Young. The screen showed a man with dark brown hair and even darker brown eyes. He was as large as a tank that Hermione thought it was impossible he remained on his broom. He was pure muscle and had a big scowl on his face. Hermione thought he was quite sourly looking, unlike the other players she had seen so far, but the crowd seemed to love him. The English cheered as the beater waved his bat in the air and hovered next to the keeper. The remaining beater and chasers were introduced to the roaring of the crowd. The other beater, one Daniel Powell, number 29, was almost as muscular as Young, but not quite. He clanked bats with his partner while they hovered in the air. The chasers were Elise Pearson, number 18, the one who held the record for most points scored in the season so far, Francesca Chang, number 8, a beautiful raven-haired witch who looked too fragile to be on a broom, but apparently was one hell of a flyer, and David Bradley, number 5, the youngest player in the Quidditch World Cup, at only 18 years of age. Mentor Metaxas was always one for dramatics, so after introducing David Bradley, he paused and waited. The cheers and yells in the stadium began to peter out into a buzz. Hermione looked around her. Emily was clutching onto the rail with excitement, her eyes trained on the screen, which currently showed Metaxas just smiling serenely and still just waiting. The English fan on her other side had his fist clenched so tight in front of his chest that it was wrinkling the flag that held them in. She felt the anticipation. It was almost eerie, really, to be in a stadium that quiet. No one around her was speaking as they all stood and waited. Metaxas shot another grin to the camera before he opened his mouth to speak once more. The crowd collectively drew a breath. And last, but certainly not least, he flew to us from London, the most decorated player in the league's history, the English team captain, number 7, Seeker, Harry Potter. The stadium absolutely exploded. English and French fans cheered and hollered as a figure in white emerged in flight from the opening at the side of the stadium. "Yes, Potter," Emily screamed from beside Hermione and waved her hands in the air. Hermione clapped and watched the screen as the Seeker made his round. Harry Potter was a figure on the broom. He moved with such fluidity, such ease, that it looked like he belonged in the air. His hair was as black as midnight, and his eyes were like emeralds. His wind-swept hair revealed the scar on his forehead, which first catapulted him into the public eye. Every witch or wizard knew the story of the boy who lived, who ended up being the man who saved. But what truly made him a household name to be celebrated was what he decided to do after the Dark Lord was vanquished. Many thought he would join the ranks of the Aurors. They expected it from him. The minister and head Auror certainly approached him with the proposition. If not Auror, then perhaps a persecutor to bring justice to the remaining Death Eaters. Maybe even join the Wizengamot. He declined the offer though, and enrolled to an 8-year at Hogwarts instead. Soon after graduation, when he was 18, almost 19 years old, Harry joined the Pottermore United training camp. He worked his arse off at that camp. He had a lot more to prove. People knew he could fight. Killing Voldemort was enough evidence of that. But could he fly? Perhaps within Hogwarts he was considered a great flyer, but that didn't mean he was good enough to go pro. On the eve of his 19th birthday, Harry Potter was made reserve seeker for the Pottermore United regional team. The starting seeker, one Gabrielle Murray, mentored him. Gabriel was only in his mid-20s then, but he had been flying since he could walk. He saw the potential in Harry, saw past the name Harry Potter, and recognized the man who wanted to be in the sky. So he took Harry under his wing and taught him what he knew about the game and, more importantly, how to navigate through the politics of Quidditch to make it a career. Gabriel retired as a player a year later. An injury and his growing family made the decision for him. He didn't give up on Quidditch though, and instead bought shares, and lots of it, of the Pottermore United. As part owner, he had a huge say on who was going to replace him for the next season. Harry Potter, at age 20, became the starting seeker for one of the most famous and successful Quidditch teams in the world. He didn't remain with the Pottermore United. Players were traded as often as chocolate frog cards. After his stellar performance in the 2002 World Cup, unfortunately England was outscored during the semi-finals, the Chudley Cannons made a bid to employ the Seeker, and surprisingly, or unsurprisingly to some, he accepted. He brought 3 assistants to Chudley Cannons. Fans on either side of the English Channel knew this story, and it was Harry Potter's miraculous triumph over evil, over expectations, over fate, to end up playing the game he loved, was what made them root for him. His fights no longer involved his wand, but his broom. That, and because he was a really good seeker. And handsome too, Hermione mused. Unlike the other players, he wasn't smiling or scowling like young. Instead, he had an intense look on his face as he made his lap around the Quidditch pitch. His green eyes blazed with concentration and determination as he looked towards the other set of golden hoops. He joined his team in a hover, and that was when he finally smiled. Not at the roaring crowds, but to his teammates. Hermione saw him say something to them, which made them nod their heads and bump fists. They lined up with Potter at the front, and Hermione thought they looked like an army ready for battle. From his place at the very centre of the Quidditch pitch, Mackenzie mounted his broom. The 2 other referees followed in suit. While in a hover, he withdrew his wand from a pocket in his robes and pointed it towards his throat. Captains, his thick brogue cut through the cheering crowd and quieted the stadium. Potter and Dubois left their teams and approached him. The stadium cheered when their team captains were shown on the screen, alongside Mackenzie. "I want a clean game," Mackenzie demanded. Potter and Dubois nodded their heads and shook hands. Then they turned to the referees and shook their hands as well. "Players, in your positions," Mackenzie's voice boomed once again. The crowd watched as the keepers went to their goalposts. The beaters and chasers hovered in a circle around Mackenzie, and the trunk he brought with him still laid on the ground. The 2 seekers flew meters above the circle. The stadium held its breath. Hermione swore she could hear a pin drop as everyone watched. The screen showed the head referee and the chairman of the ICWQC exchange nods. At precisely 15:13, to honour the very first Quidditch World Cup, which was held in 1473, but 1473 was not a real time, Mackenzie pointed his wand to the vibrating trunk. The top burst open, and the bludgers, quaffle, and golden snitch were released into the air. Metaxas roared as the crowd screamed and applauded. "Let the games begin." Chapter 4. Harry Potter watched from above. He preferred to scan the field away from the rest of the melee as to avoid getting hit by a bludger or getting in the way of the chasers. He heard the crowd erupt into applause as Dubois led a goal through shot by Elise, with an assist from Francesca. The score was 20-10, with England in the lead. Harry allowed himself a small smile. Dubois was a great keeper, but the English chasers were damn good. Elise, Francesca, and Dylan moved so fast on the broom that it was impossible to track them all at once. He made his way around the top of the stadium. Harry made sure to keep his ears sharp for any approaching bludgers. His green eyes scanned the stands for any sign of gold. He saw gold indeed, but it wasn't the snitch. His eyes were drawn to the section of the stands where a French fan was hooting and hollering with a flag above her head. It wasn't her who Harry was looking at, though. It was the girl sat beside her. She looked like a French fan as well, if the flag on her shoulder and beret on her head were any indication. She had golden highlights in her chocolate brown hair, but that wasn't the gold that Harry saw. It was the damned chicken in her lap. The chicken reflected the sunlight beating down on the Quidditch pitch. It positively glowed, and Harry saw it quite clearly as he flew past. Fans were really getting inventive with their ploys to distract players. Harry scowled a bit. Perhaps he was paying too much attention to the chicken that its owner noticed his gaze. Their eyes met briefly. Hermione felt her breath get caught in her throat when those green eyes held hers for even just a second. The bludger whizzing past his head broke their gazes, and he immediately jerked to the left to avoid the collision. Looking behind him, he saw the French seeker tailing behind him a couple meters back, and had no signs of the snitch then. As he heard Metaxas announce that the score had tied 20-20, Harry thought it was time to play. It was time to fly. With the smallest of smiles, Harry crouched in his broom and zoomed across the Quidditch pitch. The French seeker following him, of course, thinking that he had seen the golden snitch. In a move that would have made Victor Crumb proud, Harry tipped his broom downward and dove in a straight vertical towards the ground. The entire stadium gasped when Potter made the dive. Hermione did so as well and set the golden rooster down. Was it actually the golden snitch? Was the game going to end with barely 30 minutes on the clock? The French sneaker caught up to Potter, and they were neck to neck. From their screen, Hermione saw both of their faces. The French's eyes kept looking at the seeker beside him. Potter, meanwhile, kept his gaze forward, with the ground fast approaching. Potter extended his left arm out and pulled out of the dive. The French's sneakers widened at the deception. With barely a meter to the ground, he managed to right his broom. At this point, the English seeker was already on the other side of the Quidditch pitch, looking once again for the golden snitch. Fans of England clapped at the wonderfully executed Vronsky feint, and for the French seeker taking the bait. Hermione felt her heart pounding in her chest when she watched the replay on the screen. It was a dangerous move even for the instigator. The French sneaker looked livid, but Potter was back in business. His head was moving back and forth as he flew near England's goalposts. An hour passed and the score was 80-50, with France in the lead. Tremblay was fouled as he was trying to score. The goal went in, but in trying to stop the score, Cheng's hand got tangled in Tremblay's broom towel. A blagging foul was awarded, and Tremblay scored once again on a rebound play. Larocque received a foul for cobbing Bradley. Bradley was awarded 2 shots in the hoops, which he nailed. Hermione and the people around her jumped back from the railing as a bludger came whizzing by and narrowly missed them. Merde! That was bumping, Emily yelled next to her. Other French fans agreed and yelled in outrage that the English beater did not receive a foul. The females yelled profanities at Young, who only shrugged as he flew by after the bludger. Another whack from his bat sent the ball towards Pomori, who was trying to score from above. Hermione sat back down and took a breath. She put a hand in between her breasts and felt the thumping of a beating heart. Emily sat down as well and nudged her. So, any regrets coming with me today? Was it worth leaving your shop to be here? Emily asked with a sly grin, an eyebrow quirked in question. Hermione looked at her best friend, decked with all manners of the French flag, and laughed. None. Absolutely none. Hermione shouted over the roar of the crowd. Chang had scored, bringing England to 160. France was still in the lead. This is something I've never experienced before. Merci beaucoup, Ellie. C'est très incroyable, she cried. This is amazing. Emily looped an arm around Hermione and squeezed. I'm so glad you're here, and I promise to help around your shop tomorrow after we celebrate tonight, because France is going to win. The witch screamed and stood up once again, waving her now half-eaten baguette in the air. Hermione laughed and shook her head. Her best friend was such a character. Emily and her met each other in their first year at Beauxbatons. They were so different. Emily was so outgoing and so loud. Hermione, on the other hand, preferred solitude and her books over people. The Ravenhaired witch was obsessed with Quidditch, while Hermione didn't even like to fly. It was during one of their flying lessons that their friendship was formed. Hermione couldn't control her broom and was hovering uncontrollably in the air. She froze while her classmates watched. Their flying professor then, one Madame Maleficent, commanded Hermione to get down. The woman wouldn't help the terrified girl. When tears sprung from Hermione's eyes, the smallest girl in class grabbed one of the brooms and flew up to her. Emily helped her down to the outrage of Madame Maleficent. They were awarded detentions, and the seed of friendship was planted. Emily helped Hermione get over a fear of flying to survive their lessons, and the horrible Madame Maleficent, while Hermione helped Emily with her other studies. Madame Maleficent was sacked at the end of the year by the headmistress. 15 years later, and their friendship was stronger than before. Emily loved designing and fashion, that after graduating from Beauxbatons, she moved to London to apprentice under Madame Malkins. Now she was an equal partner to the seamstress. Hermione stayed on the continent and worked as an aide for the French minister. Her stellar marks upon graduating brought her to the attention of the minister Pierre Lafontaine, and he immediately wanted her as a part of his staff. Over the years she climbed the ranks of the French ministry and became Minister Lafontaine's chief of staff. It was half a year ago, when Emily visited her, that she approached with an idea. Move to London, Hermione, Emily had said. Hermione looked at her incredulously. Madame Malkin heard that Flourish and Blots are selling. They don't want to run the shop anymore, and neither do their families. They're looking to sell, and they want it to leave in good hands. Haven't you always said that you wanted to own a bookstore? Well, yes, for when I'm old and retired. But now? Hermione looked absolutely stricken at the idea. Just think about it, Emily pressed. You kept telling me how stressed you are with your job. You told me Lafontaine would no longer be running in the next election too. This is a great opportunity, Hermione. Think about it, she did. She even went to speak to the minister, for what he had grown to be a mentor for her. He confirmed his plans to retire from politics at the end of his term, and echoed Amelie that it was a great idea indeed. The following day, she was taking an international portkey to Diagon Alley to see the shop she loved so much. She made a point to go every time she was in London visiting Amelie. She only wanted to see the store, maybe get a feel on how it was managed and run. She had no intention of committing to anything that day, but yet she walked out of Flourish and Blotts hours later as its new owner. She settled her affairs in France, and the previous owners agreed to manage the shop during her absence. She moved to London officially last week and was in the process of transitioning the shop's operations. The 5 other staff would be staying on, but she would be its official owner and manager on more than just paper. Amelie approached her with the tickets to the World Cup last minute. She was hesitant to go at first. Quidditch wasn't her cup of tea and was still averse to flying. But being there in the electrifying stadium, supporting Sa Patrie, was something she never thought she would experience. Chapter 5. The arena gasped, and Hermione's hand jerked to look at the screen in front of her. It showed Potter and the French seeker flying across the Quidditch field, with the grass less than a metre below their brooms. One arm was outstretched, and the screen was able to capture the golden snitch flying rapidly just out of reach. Hermione gasped and leapt to her feet. Her hands grasped the railing as she looked over it. She could see the 2 figures zoom across the pitch. When they neared the Quidditch stands directly below her, they turned their brooms upwards and shot into the sky. Her mouth turned slack as she saw them approach. Faintly she could see a little ball of gold still whizzing left and right, up and down out of the sneaker's reach. They got closer and closer, and Hermione jumped back from the railing and her seat when the seekers flew past her in a vertical climb. She felt the wind tickle her cheeks from the speed of their brooms. Hermione's hand gripped her seat as her head remained trained upwards. The seekers flew into the stratosphere, way above the stadium. There was a murmur in the arena as they all wondered what was happening, for even the screen only showed clouds. Where were the seekers? And then Hermione saw a dot emerge from the clouds. She squinted her eyes and looked at the dot, which was getting bigger and bigger. She gasped when she realized it was the sneakers. They were still flying right next to each other, but this time in the opposite direction. They dove in a straight vertical above her and towards her, both arms still outstretched, and the golden snitch still out of grasp. To Hermione it was quiet. Her ears tuned out the screams and shouts of the stadium above her. At the corner of her eye, she saw the screen flicker to capture the 2 sneakers in the dive. Vaguely she heard Metaxas say something, but she couldn't understand his words. Her whole focus was on the 2 seekers racing towards her with a fury. They were so close now that they were blocking the sun. Their faces were obscured by shadows, and yet still their figures grew larger as they approached. She saw one peel away, but yet the other kept getting closer and closer. She felt the wind knock out from her. She felt the weight on her lap. With her mouth opened in shock, she looked down to be met with the greenest eyes she had ever seen. They were wild and shining, and yet they remained locked with hers. She saw the scar above those eyes and the dark black hair which partially hid it. She saw the sharp nose and the lips parted below as their owner gasped for breath. Hermione didn't remember Metaxas roaring into the microphone saying that England had won. Hermione didn't hear the whole stadium erupt in cheers. She kept her eyes trained on the face of the man who fell into her lap as he looked at her too. She held Harry Potter's gaze as the people around them went into a frenzy. She saw those lips slowly curl into a breathtaking smile. Vaguely, she saw something gold beating furiously from the corner of her eyes. Was that the snitch? His eyes were ablaze with so many emotions. Happiness, relief, interest. There was an intensity in there too, that she couldn't quite place. And then Hermione felt something at the back of her head. The Seeker gently brought her head down, and he kissed her. Chapter 6. Now it's time for bed, Sophie, Hermione said. The little girl on the bed sighed. Those chocolate eyes grew even larger as she looked at Hermione. Her black curls swayed as she shook her head from side to side, and her bottom lip was thrust in a full pout. If she didn't stay strong, Hermione knew she would cave. "But Maman," Sophie began, "I want to hear more about how you and Daddy met." "It's way past your bedtime, love," Hermione insisted. She brushed a stray curl away from her daughter's forehead and kissed her. "You've heard that story 1,000,000 times before." A dramatic sigh escaped Sophie's lips. She brought her stuffed broom closer to her chest. "Yes, but I want to hear it again. It's my favorite story." Hermione drew the blankets higher and tucked Sophie in. "You have a busy day tomorrow, love. You have the Little League quidditch in the morning, and then it's Daddy's game in the afternoon. You wouldn't want to be tired for all that, now would you?" She stroked Sophie's head and leaned closer to her little girl. Hermione watched her daughter think. Sophie considered her words, with pursed lips and squinted eyes. Finally deciding that it would be catastrophic if she was asleep for Daddy's game, Sophie finally nodded her head and relaxed. She drew her arms from under her blanket and hugged Hermione. She kissed her mother's cheek. "Okay, I will sleep then, but I want to hear the whole story for bedtime tomorrow." Hermione laughed and kissed Sophie again. Her daughter was turning into quite the negotiator, and she had a feeling it was due to the Tante Amelia's influence. Perhaps she should find another babysitter. "Why don't you get Daddy to tell you the story tomorrow evening?" Hermione offered. Sophie smiled and nodded her head enthusiastically. Hermione squeezed her daughter once more and rose from the bed. "I love you, baby. Sweet dreams." "I love you too, Maman," Sophie replied and yawned. Hermione turned off the bedside lamp and cast the room into shadows, save for a small light shaped like a golden snitch. She walked to the door and left. It took her a while to get to the master suite, for she had multiple stops along the hallway. She finally got to the bedroom and entered. She was greeted with the sight of her husband, already in bed with a book in his hands. His chest was bare, for he was only wearing joggers, and his feet were crossed at the ankles as he read. He looked up when he heard her enter, and that smile she loved so much lit his face. "Our little princess finally let you go?" he asked in a baritone voice. He set the book down when she climbed into bed and into his arms. Her arms snaked around his waist as she snuggled into his side. "Yes, she wanted to hear the story about how you and I met again," Hermione said. She felt him shake when he laughed. "That seems to be a favorite around here. Gabe and Bast requested for the same story," he replied. "I think it's the quidditch." Hermione sighed and tisked. "Leave it to fate to have me marry a quidditch player. I didn't even like the game." Her husband laughed once again and rolled onto her back. She looked up with mirth in her chocolate eyes as she played with his hair with one hand. "Well, Mrs. Potter," Harry began, I sure hope you are a little more accommodating to the game now than you were before. If not the game, then perhaps its players? I might be persuaded, Hermione replied. She looped her hands around his neck and brought him closer. Do you know what the twins asked me tonight? He whispered. He was a hair's breadth away, and his words were like light kisses against her lips. She looked at him with questioning eyes and shook her head. They asked if they could have a little brother or sister. They said either one would work, Harry said with a grin. He watched his lovely wife burst into laughter underneath him. Oh, Harry, honestly, was Hermione's only reply to that. He nuzzled into her cheek. I did say I wanted a big family. They could be their own Quidditch team. Hermione snorted. Right, and they shall be called the Potterhead United. I knew you would see my vision, Harry said once again. He cut off another sarcastic remark from his wife by covering her lips with his. Harry and Hermione set off to make his vision, their vision, come true, with properly placed silencing wards and locking charms, of course. They had been scolded by their 5-year-old before that, practicing their winning cheers, so late at night, even if it were under the covers, would wake everyone up. So as to avoid any discontent between future players and their management, Harry and Hermione never again forgot to cast the charms. The future roster of Potterhead United slept soundly that night. I hope you enjoyed this reading of Freefall. I put a lot of time and effort into these stories, and I would really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe and share with some others. I made this channel to promote fan fictions that I personally love. If you have any recommendations that you want me to read, leave it in the comments below. For now though, I hope you have a good day or evening. Liz out.